There we go. Yeah, Kannan Thiruvengadam, and you can call me Kannan. So uh, I have great regard for what Ujima is doing, the alternate paradigm for funding and supporting organizations that are doing transformational work. So thank you for doing what you're doing. I attended one of the very early sessions, and I really regret not being able to go to um, your workshops and other sessions, but hoping to come back and get with the program soon. So, Urban Farming 101, I think Nia asked me because I run an urban farm here in East Boston. The picture you see here, the name of the farm is Eastie Farm. But the picture you see here is Eastie Farm collaborating with the ICA watershed, the Institute of Contemporary Art watershed in East Boston. And we're doing a display there to show how plants are resilient and they can come through cracks in concrete. It's a little bit artificial, but it's meant to look like an industrial setting and greenery coming through there. That's what that picture is. But Eastie Farm is about 4 years old, and we started by wanting to transform an abandoned space that the city owned, and the city was giving itself tickets for non-maintenance for, and we took over that space and started doing basically what we thought was a community-friendly activity, which is keeping it open for the community, for people to come in and grow food together. So it's been a great experience. I'm happy to talk specifically about the farm occasionally as the need arises in this presentation, but the way I've structured the presentation is based on what Nia told me about what are the different questions that people are people are looking for answers for. So first, we'll start with the definition of a farm. It is not that well known, it appears, but if you are making revenue of $1,000 or more, then you're a farm. That's the USDA definition. And it could be a small farm, it could be a large farm, it could be wherever, but urban farms tend to be small because we don't have a lot of space that could be dedicated for farms at this point in cities. They could be developed in abandoned parcels, rooftops, indoor farms, and greenhouses. There's a lot of cutting edge technology these days, some just because people are interested in doing research in how to grow crops without soil. If we run out of soil, it's unpredictable what climate change will do to the farming world. So there's some research going on, how can plants be grown without soil, just based on water, if we could circulate the nutrients through water, hydroponics, and those happen indoors typically. And so other than that, everything here should be obvious for people. Greenhouses, people understand those. Rooftops for abandoned parcels and what are called health strips, and you name it, whatever opportunity there is to grow something, you can grow something there. But as long as you're growing something that's to code, according to the government, various levels of the government, and you are selling above $1,000 of it, then you've got a farm. Is there any way to mute the phones joining? No? Okay, if it's possible at all. Otherwise, it's fine. But you're welcome to ask questions as we go through the presentation. You don't have to wait for the end. So some examples you would ask for, so there are plenty in the city, and one good one that I like to visit and I've benefited from interacting with is Revision Urban Farm in Dorchester. And if you haven't been there, it's a great place to go. They are growing things both outdoor and indoor, and they're growing in greenhouses in the back of houses, back of triple deckers and things like that. So, and they sell a lot of seedlings that more than satisfies their need to be a revenue generating farm. But on top of that, there's a lot of other commercial work that happens as well. Revision Urban Farm, beautiful place with talented and passionate people. And Eastie Farm is a farm according to the definition of USDA. Our focus has been more environmental, educational, and also looking to see how we can build community resiliency by keeping the farm space open to all people at all times. So it's a very different paradigm. When we were starting this experiment, it wasn't clear how well it was going to work, about not having any space that's owned by any individual or household or school or any kind of entity, but instead saying that the entire community owns the entire space. It's for all of us to maintain and do food growing experiments with. It's been a very interesting journey. I'm happy to share several different aspects of it, but just know that it's a different kind of a farm. The commercial focus is only slowly coming into being. When we initially started, it was more an endeavor for bringing people together. This East Boston is a very diverse neighborhood and changing all the time. So building bridges is a key goal for open spaces like this. And currently in Boston, you may have visited a freight farm. There are several freight farms around the city. You may have seen one. They are actually literally in freight containers, but they are indoors. And everything happens indoors there. So it doesn't matter what the season is or the climate is or the weather is. This grows whatever it is efficient to grow in a space like this using grow lights and hydroponics. So which is like water circulated with nutrients in them. And because of the recycled water, the loss of nutrients is very little. It's very efficient use. And it is cut off from the outside world. So there's some criticism around why aren't we using solar and whatnot. I think that Freight Farms itself is looking into that. But currently, their so-called green machine product, it really works completely indoors. And Urban Farming Institute, some of you may be familiar with this. A beautiful, beautiful venture with many different farm spaces and also a big focus on involving community. So I'll switch it to desired and potential benefits. I think you'd asked for this. So there are I put them in three categories: the social benefits, the economic benefits, and environmental benefits. So we'll look at them that way. And then if you have questions about any of those, I'm happy to answer them. So let's start with social. I know that I've interacted with several farm spaces in other parts of the world, of the city, and even actually in other parts of the country. And it's interesting how a green open space has led to a general sense of well-being, not just physical, but also mental. And that has typically, by virtue of taking a negative space and turning it into a positive space, has led to crime reduction. And as people come together in spaces like that, it has also led to community cohesion, whether they're coming together to work on the farm together, or whether they're coming there to shop, or whether they're coming there to grow food or to learn something. So to that point, if you look at the picture on the right, this is the main space where we started Eastie Farm. And the house on the left is an Italian-American family, lives there. The house on the right is a Salvadoran-American family. When we first opened up the space and invited people to come and start cleaning up, because it was contaminated soil, another thing about urban farming to know is that soil is probably got lead in it, maybe small amounts, maybe large amounts, but it definitely has lead. And you have to deal with that, so which means you may want to sheet mulch and you need to prepare before you let kids in and pregnant women in. So during that phase, we were just doing a lot of cleaning and we had invited the entire community to help out with that. At that time, the house owner here, Kenny, and the house owner here, Benedicto, came together in the farm space for the very first time and shook hands. And that brought those two families together. And that was interesting to watch because those are different, what the family on the right side represents as in the Latin American, Central American, South American immigrants in East Boston, and what on the left represents is Italian American, which was a previous wave of immigrants into East Boston. These people to come together is a beautiful thing. And later on, of course, now that our neighborhood has been discovered and a lot of people landing here and buying homes, there's also a new group of people who show up, who have a lot of interest in community and environment. They show up and they're also joining the group. So it leads to this cohesion of the community, which is wonderful to see. And in general, there are several studies to show. Many of us don't need the studies to believe that green spaces, open spaces are better for public health. They help us deal with pollution. They also give us more oxygen and just this general sense of open spaces, and it's associated with having breathing room. And the exposure to a green career path for youth has been interesting as well. We have, at one point we worked with Meridian House, which is a rehabilitation home in East Boston, and we involved the people in doing gardening. Basically, they were helping us out with doing regular watering and weeding and things like that. But in the process, they also attended a lot of workshops and learned a lot. And I run into some of those people now, and some of them graduated and not in the neighborhood anymore, but still come to visit and learn from them that they have actually learned from their experience and have used that to do something in terms of their career. And the younger youth that show up here during the summer program as part of our junior farmers program, or during the school term as part of regular school programming, we're also getting a lot of exposure and learning something, and we're hoping that that would lead to more options in their careers. Environmental benefits, any permeable space reduces flooding with increasing climate change and increasing precipitation, which is what is expected in the Northeast. There will be a lot of water, and the more we build and the more non-permeable surface we have, the more flooding we're seeing. And this is not just speculation. We already see this in several forms in many parts of the city, and especially in East Boston, where I live. We even see flooding in hilly areas where, due to development, the water doesn't have a lot of space to go through. So when it has these narrow spaces to go down, it goes down more forcefully and it takes soil down. So it leads to erosion and mudslide. So when we have that problem, the more permeable spaces you have, the more space there is for water to go down. So just whatever rainwater falls on that space. In addition, when you're running an urban farm, you're likely to have buildings around you. You can collect rainwater from that. So on either side, I showed you that there are houses on either side of this space. We collect water from their rooftop. We tested the water and it's good. There's one section where the water comes from a deck, which has treated wood. We don't use that for edibles, but everything else is good, and we do use it. And it's a ton of water. It's a lot of water. And if we weren't collecting this water, they get chronic water damage during regular times, and they get serious flooding when there is extreme precipitation. We're able to turn both of those problems into benefits. Now the neighbors are able to come over and harvest vegetables and things like that. This particular farm is an open space for people to come and do whatever, which includes harvesting. So people do benefit from that. But we see that as something that we can all learn from, that if we it is possible to turn problems into solutions and benefits. So that's why we make it possible for anybody to come and harvest in here. And the neighbors definitely come, or they just stand across the fence and ask us for a tomato or a pepper or whatever they feel like. So this is them giving us water and us returning something to them in thanks. So that works very well and creates this nice relationship between the farm and its neighbors. So that's dealing with rainwater. Waste management, we have a composting facility as well, where we do workshops as to how to deal with food waste. People bring food waste there to learn how to turn that into soil. And it's particularly helpful because if we don't create our own soil through composting, we'd be buying it from elsewhere. And somebody else will have to transport that. That's even more carbon, so we cut that. And food waste getting transported out of the neighborhood, we cut that as well. And when food waste does go to an incinerator, as it does in Boston, that leads to even more carbon in the atmosphere, and it leads to pollution in nice, beautiful settings like the marsh, which is where the ash is dumped, and it affects already threatened and environmental justice communities that are around the marsh, including the life in the marsh. So you cut out all those problems and you turn the food waste into soil for yourself. It's a wonderful local solution, and people also get into that. It's kind of exciting. It's new. It probably isn't new, but it's new for many of us. So it is kind of exciting to learn that. A lot of school kids learn that. Adults learn that as well. It seems composting is not that is not common knowledge. And people have fears that you may get rats or whatever, and other kinds of fears about smell. But there is science behind composting. We have a wood shop here in the shipyard. We get sawdust from them, and we use that wood shavings and sawdust to put on top of the food waste, and that cuts out the access for fruit flies and things like that. It keeps the smell down, and that wood shaving provides carbon anyway, much needed carbon that you need. You have to have a good carbon and nitrogen ratio in order for microbes to do their thing in composting. So that it works out in a great way. Win-win, as we say. The wood shop actually has to pay for their wood shavings and sawdust to be taken away, but when we take them, they don't have to spend that money. And that serves for as carbon in our soil, in our compost, but it also serves to keep it clean and without any odors. People walk right past our compost bins without realizing there's composting going on. So that's possible. That's another benefit. Local food production reduces carbon as well, because you're going to buy food from somewhere else, which means it has to be transported to wherever you are. The rainwater management, I mentioned that. And greenery and soil reduce urban heat island effect. We've measured the temperature, how it feels. There's a mulberry tree in the back of this farm, and we've set up a stage, and there's a hammock on the stage where you can go and relax. And I should have put a picture of that. It's a beautiful little space to take some refuge. Even on a hot summer day, the temperature there could be 12 to 15 degrees lower than the street temperature. So that keeping these green open spaces helps us fight urban heat island effect as well, which is expected to get exacerbated as climate change rages on. And the biodiversity is improved. We see all kinds of birds in the mornings. We see all kinds of insects, and it's just, there are many beings that we haven't seen, creatures that we haven't seen. We're able to see that in this little space. So even though we're going through the 6th largest extinction the planet has ever had, and we're losing biodiversity in a big way, it seems that even creating these tiny spaces really helps many species a lot. So it's good to have that as a result of having a farm space. There are photographers who come and take pictures of all kinds of critters in this space. I haven't put any of them here, but you can see that on our social media pages. And soil carbon sequestration is another thing to mention as well. Carbon, of course, is absorbed by plants, as we all know, during photosynthesis, but they also exude carbon, organic matter, into the soil. And the more you can retain in the soil, the more carbon you're locking in the soil, which means that you're taking carbon away from the atmosphere, and that's the opposite of what's happening in the world in terms of fossil fuel combustion and how that results in either methane directly because of leaks or carbon dioxide when methane is burnt or other fossil fuels are burnt. So that is adding carbon dioxide to the atmosphere, but sequestration of carbon in the soil is done by plants. And if you're mindful of how it's done, then you can actually do a lot by way of reversing climate change. For people who are curious about that, if you want to check out 4P1000, as in 4% of carbon increase in the soil every year. It's kind of a target that will help us cut down some atmospheric carbon in a significant manner and help us work towards keeping to the safe limit of 2 degrees. So check out that website. You can learn more about soil carbon sequestration. And finally, economic benefits. It seems a lot of people want to work in local spaces. It's nice to be outdoors. Kids love it much more than people expect. It seems it's very, very easy to take electronics away from kids if they have a green open space to run around and play in. So there's all this attraction towards farms. And we give stipends to young people who work, but we also give larger stipends to older people who come into space. But if you look at the other farms in the city and elsewhere, you will find that people are finding employment with farms. And that is a green way of being employed as opposed to an extractive or an exploitative way of being employed. I'm sure there are farm workers that are being abused as well. In the urban world, there tends to be more awareness and a little bit more of a sense of dignity of labor and compensation. So the economics when it comes to employment in urban farming is in general pretty good. And the sustainability of an organization by doing farming is also an economic benefit. Because now you have an organization that you can run. People are doing something with their lives. They're occupied. They're making a difference. They're having an impact as long as they can sustain themselves. And that the farm can help with, because you can grow what you're growing. You can sell what you're growing. On top of that, if you manage to make a little profit, now you're creating wealth, which becomes an investment vehicle. And you can invest in Ujima and other wonderful ventures like that. And so other topics that were mentioned, what are the challenges? There are a lot of challenges because this is not something a lot of people do, as it turns out. So you're learning a lot about how to run farms. And starting could be itself a problem. You need space, or you need a container or something so you can do indoor farming, or you need a rooftop. But you need some sort of space. And finding that itself could be challenging, especially in the city. That can be very, very challenging. A densely populated city, a city that is very much sought after, and a lot of people moving into the city, there is a tremendous amount of pressure on increasing housing. So looking for farming space can be very, very challenging. So it may even seem like a competition, because people say, well, you can have a farm here, or you can have 27 condos, and which could house 27 families. So what do you want to do? And that is a hard discussion for communities. And in our space, that was a discussion. There were two other proposals for this space, and some of them were condos, and one of them even included a rooftop garden space, but the community voted to have Eastie Farm there. They appreciated that it's visible, the access is obvious, and it seemed more human for people to be able to see what's going on from outside and then step right into a farm. So that's why we have this. But we had to campaign for that heavily, and we had to go around and ask people who we know support this to actually vote and show up in the meeting and write letters and things like that. So it's not easy, but it is very doable because there is support in the community for green open spaces. And these days there's funding as well. Towards the end, I've included some funding sources. I'll go over that. Finding expertise can be a problem too, because this is not an area where there are a lot of experts. There are gardening experts, but farming is per se, it can be harder. And money is, you can raise it in the community. You can come up with seed funding. There's several foundations that can help. Governments can help as well, but money is needed. In the beginning, though, you'll have a hard time convincing potential funders that this is going to be a successful venture. So you may have to do something creative. You know, we did a lot of that. We did a lot of rescuing things that were otherwise going to be thrown away and turning them into resources that we could start the farm with. And I'll give you a few more examples of that if we have time towards the end. So, but space, expertise, and money, finding all that is really what you need to do. But all of that is challenging. And Operations is not easy either. I mean, there may be some people who are excited in starting something, but may not be excited in running the same thing. And these are like serial entrepreneurs. But operations has its own beauty of finding your rhythm, finding where you belong in the community, what gaps you're filling, what benefits you're bringing that are appreciated and needed, and then fitting into that gap and contributing, and then just being engaged in that space. Retaining the space. If you don't own the space, then how are you going to find the lease to, come up with the lease money to keep that year after year, and also keep the neighbors happy? And retaining the expertise. People move, people change their interests. So how do you retain the expertise and also earning revenue year after year? So I basically put everything that it takes to start and run a business as a challenge here. And basically that's because this is not a space that people understand really well. There is a ton of information out there, but it is not the same as making something happen. And when you run up against permitting issues, local resistance, and people being skeptical about whether this is what's we needed here, and people may be skeptical based on who is starting this and what impression the community has of them. So there can be all kinds of issues. But this is a new thing that people don't understand really well. So there's a lot of education that's needed as well, and community engagement. But if you approach it respectfully, if you talk to people, if you understand their needs, and if you design the business in a way that fits in well, then I believe it can work really well. But these are all challenges. And what would it take to do this? I think the subsections there were how hard can it be? It's not like, there's no recipe, right? It's not like you look it up and you say, I got to do 10 things and then I've got a farm going. It's not like that. So you can work with the city and whoever is the permitting authority for you to have what you want to have. And that process could be a big discovery process. And what we learned as a small ad hoc community organization, which really just wanted to keep some open spaces for food growing. What we learned was that the government is set up better to work with large developers than it is set up to work with small organizations that want to do things. And even when we secured our space, when we say, yeah, can we take up the space and can we start getting utilities in, we were designated as a developer. And we didn't think we were a developer. But I was like, oh, maybe we should put up 27 condos. We're now a developer, right? So, but it's just, and that also means these complicated processes to go through and several agencies and organizations to work with, and a large sum of money to come up with in order to get even water. Getting water supply could cost anywhere from $30,000 to $60,000. The city of Boston is very sympathetic to this complication, so they're trying to help where they can. But if you start a farm today, you have that hefty amount of money that you have to come up with. And for small community organizations, that's hard. So this has this very high threshold that you have to cross in order to get something going. But the fact that we had rainwater helped us. And there's another option, if you're curious about it, you can always get licensed to use a fire hydrant. So you get a contraption that you attach to the hydrant and you can get water from there, and there's a meter and you actually pay for that. So it works out really well. And that is a matter of days for you to get a permit and go pick up that contraption that from the Boston Water and Sewer Commission. So there are some options, but if you're looking to set up a clear, well-established smooth running process, then you want water supply, and that means you have to come up with that money. If you have soil that you're trying to remediate, that is going to cost you something. We weren't in a big hurry to get going in a commercial sense, so we slowly did sheet mulching, and we built up a good amount of topsoil. And if you try to test for lead in our space, you won't find, at the same depth, you won't find the same amount of lead as you did 4 years ago. Basically because we have buried the lead by creating more topsoil. and we didn't extract the lead out. You can do that. There are hello?
Hey.
Is everybody still there?
Yep.
Yeah?
Yeah, we can hear you, Kannan. Can you
I lost connection there for a second.
Can you hear us okay?
looks like it froze.
Let me know if you can hear me.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Can you hear us?
Not sure how well you're able to hear me, but
We can hear you,
I
Kannan.
can hear you well.
yeah, all right, great, great. Okay.
All right, we lost your presentation though.
Oh, okay, I'll go back and get it again. Oh, sure.
You were talking about sheet mulching.
Are you able to see the presentation now?
Yep, we got you.
Okay. So I was talking about sheet mulching, and I was saying that if you have a lot of time, then you could do sheet mulching, which is basically like putting cardboard and other organic matter that will turn into soil over time. If you think about how this happens in the forest, leaves fall, twigs fall, branches fall, and animals die and fall. So all of that on the forest floor turns into soil, and the thinner the layer, the quicker the decomposition. So sheet mulching is based on that principle. But if you don't have the time to do sheet mulching, then you would just do an excavation task or something to get rid of the lead and bring in cleaner soil to get started right away. So that's remediation and can be very costly. Getting permits and being compliant, that could cost as well, both in terms of time and in terms of money. And people, when we started growing edibles, we thought, oh, we could just grow whatever as long as the soil is clean. But really, if you want to be able to sell stuff, then you have to comply with the permits. And the city of Boston has very specific requirements as to how to do urban ag. And it's not too complicated, but there are specific steps to go through in order to make sure that your soil is tested, you have weed protection underneath the clean soil, and before you start growing anything in the soil, and a few other things. But permits and compliance can take a little bit of learning and some time to go through that learning curve, and some money in actually acquiring those permits. And the money may be because you need to hire a civil engineer to draw something up for you, a landscape architect to bless your design, whatever, but still you do need to spend that money. And utilities like electricity and water are going to cost money just for the setup, and then eventually for operations. Maybe the operational cost won't be that much, but the setup cost is hefty. Maintenance in general of the conditions of the place. If you want it to be accessible, then ensuring that the access is safe and all parts of the farm are reachable for volunteers, for staff, for kids who are in the space, and for anybody else that may need to be in the space getting a tour or whatever. So ensuring that the tools are in working order, and ensuring that the space remains safe and secure, and ensuring that the neighbors are not put in any kind of risk because of whatever goes on in the space. All of that is part of maintenance and can be costly. And it may just come down to having a staff member that is at least part-time who's paying attention to all this and addressing issues as and when they arise, but that still means that you got to pay them. And labor in terms of working in the farm, watering, weeding, harvesting, cleaning, collecting, processing, maybe turning your produce into some sort of value-added product. Maybe you're making like mint chutney or something, you know, and then bottling that and selling that. All of that is labor, and that is costly as well. And well, there are ways to address all this, of course, but you have to know that there's cost associated. If you go in thinking it's not going to cost much, you're wrong. So it's best to try to come up with a realistic budget based on your goals at the time. And then, of course, the budget will change and you go with the flow. So there was also a question about what necessary resources. I think I said land here, and there should be, of course, water. Without water, you know, this is not going to work. Sunlight, I should have put in there. So soil, sunlight, water, it's a critical environmental resources, and people with the knowledge of how to treat plants. What is the spacing? Because plants grow and they will occupy more space, and they need space for air to pass through so that water doesn't accumulate and doesn't become a vector for pests, and ensuring basically that everything that you're expecting will happens, or at least 80%, 90% of that happens, so you can have a decent amount of growth, and that turns into harvest, and that turns into commercial revenue if that's what your farm is about, or bringing it to other clientele, as the case may be. In our case, most of the produce from Eastie Farm goes to a soup kitchen, it goes to a family shelter, and it goes to a food pantry, and also general community members are allowed to come in and harvest. So it actually does not get sold. But whatever your goal may be, you want to make sure that you get your crop. And for that, you need the expertise. So regular staff for maintenance and sales, and maybe some seasonal staff, as you must be familiar with farms. They're very seasonal, so hiring seasonal staff. There are visa programs to help with that. And there are several resources and opportunities to staff for seasonal goals. And administration in terms of running the business, bookkeeping, so your books are clean and you understand what is going into your business and what's coming out of it, and where you're getting the best benefit. If you're looking to increase your sales, what crop is your cash crop? And so things like that, you will learn best by keeping very good books, and management of staff, volunteers, community members, and other programming that may be going on in the space. So stop me when we are at time. We're at 7:20. I don't know if...
Yeah, we started a little late, so how about 5 more minutes?
Okay, all right, sounds good.
Make sure we get any.
Yeah, so the process is, I think, straightforward, but I put in, finding land and finding funds, most of the problem when it comes to starting, and then, to sustain it, you want expertise. But I also put in problem solvers here because it is a pioneer area in, urban farming is. And so there are some folks that can give you advice, but you'll find that they themselves are figuring a lot of things out. And you may be one of the pioneers yourself if you're starting around now. And so there is a lot of problems to solve. And, a simple example I can give is when we started with this space and we needed compost and clean soil to be dumped in the space so we could do some vegetable beds starting right away. They told us that we can't dump on the sidewalk because that'd be inconveniencing people and it's actually not legal. And we weren't allowed to open up the fence either to get access into the space, the city owned space, and the city owned it at the time. And we weren't allowed to create access for the truck to come in and dump. So we couldn't go inside and we couldn't dump any delivery outside. Then what are we supposed to do? So we pulled up the truck as close to the fence as possible and dropped right on the chain link fence. And some of it, of course, fell on the sidewalk. We had some people ready there to move whatever soil was dumped on the sidewalk immediately into the farm space. So in a matter of 3-4 hours at the most, we managed to make sure that the sidewalk is clean. But for that short time there, it was a little bit of an inconvenience. And so we had to work through that space so that we could move forward. Otherwise, there was no way to move forward. And when we were doing composting again, because we wanted to start generating our own soil and people wanted to bring food waste, and we tell people, oh, bring food waste. But then we didn't think about how would they bring it? What would the container be? So for many people, it was a non-starter. They didn't know where to store their food waste in order to bring it to the farm. But then we found that Banh Mi, that food truck and also restaurant, they have all these soy sauce buckets that they were throwing away. So we took those buckets and we gave those buckets to people so that they could put their food waste in there and bring it to the farm and dump it into where we're doing composting and then take the bucket back. So now they've got a way to solve that problem. When we were selling seedlings, again, we found that many people were reluctant to buy because they, number one, didn't know how to care for things even though they wanted to. 2, did not have a pot. 3, did not have soil. 4, did not have soil amendments. So if we're just selling seedlings from the tray, they really weren't going to go very far in terms of their growth. So when we started giving them plastic pots that were abandoned and ignored and all over the place, and soil that we could get from free sources that provide compost to nonprofits, then we would mix it with regular soil to make an organic soil, and soil amendments that we created from worm composting and things like that. When we gave all that to people, then it was a solution. Then it actually worked. Then people bought the seedlings and took care of them and could contact us to figure out how to take care of something, or if they had a problem with some seedling, didn't know exactly what to do when it was turning yellow or not doing well or whatever. So it's just important to figure out why something is not happening and then solve it. And you need problem solvers. That is the critical part of this process. And I mean, we're all problem solvers. We just have to have that attitude of, okay, so I've taken this up and it's not working, and what can I do to make it work? So other than that, it's finding land, finding water, finding sunlight, and finding resources, or getting creative with the resources that you do have. I'll mention some of the funding sources here. If you're just starting, New England Grassroots Environment Fund is a great organization. They love to do seed funding. And there's the Boston Foundation. Locally here, there's the East Boston Foundation as well. And CPA, the Community Preservation Act, which was passed recently in Boston, has 3 program areas: affordable housing, open space, and historic preservation. But under open spaces, farms can be supported as long as there is a community component to that, when the farms are serving the purpose of preserving the community. The D&D, Department of Neighborhood Housing, Neighborhood Development in the city of Boston, is also a source of funding. State level, there's the Massachusetts Department of Agricultural Resources. Even right now, they have a grant available if you're looking to raise some funds, and Clean Energy Council, Mass Clean Energy also. And I think within the Environment Department, they have several funding sources as well. If you're doing something to use renewable energy in your farm, like solar, or if you're doing ground source heat pump or whatever, they can help with that if you're looking to fuel your greenhouse with that. Federal, USDA, Fish and Wildlife, EPA, these are all potential sources for funding when it comes to farms. what's the next step in the process? Whatever you manage to grow or create, sustain that. And that is a very, very critical step because, as I mentioned earlier, there could be a lot of excitement in starting something. And if you don't sustain it, then you've lost something wonderful that you've started. And you should be willing to pivot. And this is a general advice for any business. You should be willing to pivot based on what the community needs. If you're in a changing community, the needs of the community change as well. Accordingly, you should be ready to change your business. And you started with a mission, keep that in mind. At some point, maybe that'll change, but it's important to keep that in mind and keep an open eye for opportunities. The best way to grow is by leveraging opportunities as and when they show up, as opposed to waiting until you're ready to do something. It's better to be responsive to opportunities when they come knocking. So I'll stop there. You can ask questions. This question is not about gardening, but Eastie Farm is involved in a school teaching climate science and actions for dealing with climate change. And this is the question one of the kids asked after we went through the science of climate and said to them, you know, the heat is accumulating on the planet because it's being trapped by carbon dioxide and other heat trapping gases. This was his question. How can we get the heat out? Any of you know the answer?
Shade tree dynamic.
Ari?
True. Protect the Amazon.
Yeah.
Stop animal farming.
Good ideas, good thoughts.
Stop big farming. Stop the factory farms.
Yeah. Trees and stop factory farming. And I think I didn't hear something in the middle.
Okay, we can stop all the cars.
All right, questions about this presentation? Anybody?
Oh yeah, I have. I saw a demonstration once where newspaper was put in worms with food waste, and I wonder what you think of that for compost. And I'll tell you, I like that thing about taking the water from the roofs.
Thank you. Newspaper in worm compost, is that what you said?
Yes.
Yeah, newspapers are compostable. You know, paper is produced from plant material, so it is compostable. And the newspapers, people use them in worm composting, especially just to give them a little bit of insulation. Worms like to be in the dark. That's their instinct for safety. So newspaper or cardboard, you could use on the very top of the worms themselves in a worm bin. And basically they get shelter out of that, but eventually the cardboard or the paper will also get composted. So then you put a new layer on. So any paper material is good to compost, and that applies for regular composting. Like if you're doing it in a heap or a compost bin, the suggestion there would be to tear the paper up or the cardboard up into lots of pieces, so there's more surface area for microbes to act on. But in a worm compost, you don't need to do that.
Kannan, what would you say is the minimum cost to start a new urban farm?
Minimum cost. How big is the farm?
Let's see.
I don't know.
Okay, so let's say that let's say it's 1,000 square feet, right? So that's not much at all. It's like a third of the space that you saw. I'll go back here and show. So that space that you see there on the right, there's a little bit more behind there as this house lot turns to the left, and it's kind of like L-shaped. But you're looking at most of the farm space here. So this is about 3,000 square feet. And 1,000 square feet would be about a third of that, like stop at that point. So it really does depend on your goals. If you're looking to buy, then all you really need is the money to buy that space. If you already have the space available, all you really need is to remediate the soil, which, as I said, can be done very cheaply using sheet mulching, as long as you have the time. And then your expenses the expense for buying the seedlings. That is how we started. We don't own the space. We didn't own the space, so we didn't, and we weren't buying it or renting it. The city gave us a permit to use it, and there are still spaces like that where people will give you permit to use, and then you're just talking about your expenses for buying the seedlings. And that could be a few $100s. We started with about $3,000.
Okay. And we are not going to be operating an urban farm. We would be financing an urban farm.
Mm-hmm.
You give us some examples in Boston. How many urban farms would you say there are right now? And then if an urban farm would be looking for financing, what would you say they would? And I imagine it'd be different for each farm, but what would a farm likely be looking for financing for?
I imagine that they would be looking for financing to start a new farm.
Okay.
So that is, like I said, setting up cost is much higher than the operational cost. So if somebody is looking to start a farm, that's exactly where they need financing help. And that could be, if we take a space like that, that could easily be $100,000. Yes, yeah. I mean, that was a shocker for us when we learned about what it's going to take to turn this space into an established farm space, because utilities themselves can cost anywhere between $30,000 and $75,000. If somebody's looking to get water and electricity, for example, where they don't already have that. And we didn't have that here. And we still don't. But we did raise the money to do that, and we'll be doing that this year. So a space like this, if they're talking about utilities, creating access so that it's ADA compliant, and having some basic safety measures, and if the soil is not good enough to grow in, to create vegetable raised beds, and basic supplies like water cans and some storage area for tools and things like that, that's $100,000 is not at all a small amount. I mean, a large amount. Go ahead.
Question about division of labor. You talked about the different types of tasks that are needed: accounting, bookkeeping, someone to do water testing, soil testing.
Yeah.
Mostly volunteers, but is there anyone like maybe yourself who's full-time, focused on the farm? I'm trying to get a picture of what it might cost to staff the farm.
Without having someone, so let's go back to this space. To do everything that is needed to do, like you said, water testing, soil testing, and weeding, watering, and all sheet mulching and all kinds of stuff, without having someone to lead that effort, putting in at least about 20 hours a week, it would be very, very difficult, because there needs to be a concerted amount of effort put in on a regular basis for a continuous period of time for something like this to take hold. So I would say you're looking at a half-time person at the very least for starting.
Got it.
Yeah.
Thank you. And then just how many volunteers do you have right now helping out with the farm?
We have about 50 to 100 people who have signed up, but you will see on a regular basis about 30 people. Yeah. So they're not coming because we need them to do something. They're coming because we do these work parties where we want people to be present, and even whether they're there to chat or learn something or attend a workshop, they're there. But they're all available as volunteers, and we don't really depend on 30 volunteers being available all the time. With about 10 people available during a work party, that's what we call it, on a Saturday, we are able to do basically everything that's needed to be done on a weekly basis. On a daily basis, we have people coming in, 2 people coming in to water, weed, and things like that. So that's, so, I mean, it's because we don't have that daily routine, we have more like a weekly routine. It's harder to answer the question, but we have about 30 volunteers. We don't need about 30 volunteers. Does that answer your question at all? Sorry, maybe I can.
No, it does. No, that's, I was just trying to get a picture of that.
Thank you, Kannan. And then there's one more, I think, comment. This will be the last one from Sky.
So I just wanted to add for everyone to know that there's this program in Maine that does an intensive training thing where you go there for training in permaculture.
The workshops that we offer? Is that what you're talking about, or is it something else?
And it's very comprehensive, and then
Guys, maybe
New Englanders.
it's for New Englanders.
And you then get help from people, like it's a trading of labor as well as the training being all thrown together. And you get like, I don't know, 20 people from the program come and join your project and getting it launched. So
Did you hear
it's
that?
something to know.
Thank you, Sky. Did you hear that, Kannan?
No, can you repeat that, please?
I'll repeat it to them a little closer. So Sky was just saying there's a program in Maine, it's a training program. It's comprehensive and it's for New Englanders. And so training is essentially exchange for labor. So you can participate in the program, get the training, and then you can help launch.
Oh yeah. It's called Perma Blitz.
Yeah.
It's it's people showing up to do something that would be hard for a couple of people to do, but when 30 people from the neighborhood show up, it gets done in one day, maybe even half a day if you're well organized. But then everybody goes off and helps someone else with that. So it's called Perma Blitz in the world of permaculture. And people who our model is slightly, sorry?
I just didn't hear you. So you said it's called Perma Blitz. Yeah?
Yeah, Perma Blitz, PERMABLITZ, Perma Blitz. And so our model is not that. What we learned this community could use and gets excited about is learning about rainwater conservation. So learning about how to create a rain barrel. If you're going to rig a rain barrel, the rain barrels we have are not actually rain barrels. You know, they are, do I have a picture here? They are vanilla barrels. These are vanilla barrels from a bakery. The bakery was going to throw that away. And so we got them, we rigged them with the help of Green Cambridge. You know, they've done a lot of that, so they came and showed us. So we do workshops about how to do rainwater conservation. We do workshops about composting. So we find that people, you know, schools and other organizations come to learn this. And while they're there, they're also happy to help with stuff. So there is sort of a permablitz component to that. But as I said, we tend not to rely on the 30 or so people that show up in order to do what we need to get done at the farm.
Cool. Thank you, Kannan. We're going to wrap up here. This was wonderful. We appreciate, and just for some background, we contacted Kannan last night at like 6:30 or 7 o'clock to do this, and sent him the questions at 8 o'clock, I think. And it looks like this presentation was crafted with the questions we sent. So we appreciate
Thank you.
putting together a solid custom-made presentation. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. It was put together in the last hour because my day was pretty much already decided, so I had to finish the day and then do this. But I'm glad you like it, and I hope it answered some of the questions that you had asked.
Thank you so much. And is there any contact information, Kannan, if anyone wants to learn more about urban farming in general or learn more about Eastie Farm?
The Urban Farming Institute does courses. Eastie Farm, I'm happy to answer questions myself. My email address is sillycilantro@gmail.com. And the Eastie Farm's email address is eastiefarm, one word, urbanfarming@gmail.com. And we're also on social media. As I said, UFI the Urban Farming Institute does courses that are really good when it comes to farming and gaining expertise. Trustees also do courses at the Boston Public Market, and those are more like master urban gardening courses, but they're still very helpful in terms of learning what you need to learn about ecology.
Cool. Thank you so much, Kannan.
Thank you.
And have a wonderful night. Thank you, Tony.
You too.
Tony, are you going to stay with us on Zoom? We're going to break out into our arts and culture organizing team and our podcast team.
Would you like me to stay on? Hello?
You can. I mean,
Hello?
That's up to you.
Yes,
Hello?
sure, no
Tom,
problem.
Tom, can you hear?
I can hear you now. Yes, I can stay on.
All right, cool. Okay, who's here for arts and culture organizing? Who's here for podcasts?
Yeah.
Okay. Tone, are you interested in arts and culture organizing or podcasts?
You said podcast, what was the first one?
What's up? Wait, hold on, y'all, I can't hear. Which one? Which one?
I didn't hear the first option.
So there are two breakout teams meeting tonight. One is arts and culture organizing, and one is podcast. Which one are you interested in joining?
The former, please.
Okay, all right, cool. Yeah, so arts and culture staying here, and podcast still this morning. If we can transition quickly, so if you're not meeting in a breakout team, if you can take a conversation outside. If you're not meeting in a go to the small room. How many dollars did you do so far? Can you do the second? Please do the second.
That's good. Well, I was gonna make up some stuff like they give you the ballot, but never mind.
They were supposed to have like kind of like a cloud background. Or like a sort of like, yeah. And you didn't do it. So I was like,
He or she?
I think it's
He was just right.
If I had sex, it would have been like Blue was there several times, which was like, it's not about this conversation anymore. You don't have snacks. She's like, I'm ready to go home now. I don't know why we're still sitting here. These people don't have food.
So good.
They don't have snacks.
All right, so you don't have to go home, but if you're not here for arts and culture organizing, you gotta get out of here.
I'll see you. I'll text you.
All right, I'm gonna repeat this. Okay, now call people out. Charles, Lucas, Louise, Ron. If you are not here for arts and culture organizing, please leave. It's not your conversation somewhere else.
I need round 2 and round 3.
Thank you.
Who else am I calling out? Round 2.
Oh, I didn't sign it.
We might need to make a.
I have some more back.
Oh, well, you need to meet because I'm going to give you this laptop.
All right.
Do you need a laptop?
Yes, we need to.
Because I just need to take stuff off. I'd rather if you just.
Thank you so much.
You're gonna.
I brought that back.
You're gonna look pretty sure for meeting.
Yes.
Maybe I'm because we also could do the whole teams.
We need to do what we need to do. Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, tell me what that is.
I'm not gonna tell you what that is.
All right.
This is a lot of things. It's one conversation. I can
Are they
make
all
a lot
completed?
of points.
Right here, kind sir.
I'd have to sit and think of examples to make one point to you, I think.
And we're gonna talk about the health team. What the hell? Joyce, what is that reaction? Thank you, Michael Prentice.
Also, this one keeps leaving me on red.
Oh my God.
So extra.
Wait, say that again?
I'm all up, messaging on Instagram, taking chances. Left
Have
on
fun,
red.
y'all.
Weeks.
Left on, unread.
Well, no, red. And unresponded to.
Oh, well, that's honest.
Well,
I need some public accountability right
the
now.
public accountability
I need some
is
radio
a private.
collaboration.
It's a public accountability for private conversation.
Michael,
Make it make sense.
Michael, take this downstairs to the podcast team. That's all.
Make it make sense, Jesus.
And then there's a sign-in sheet for us.
Thank you.
Public accountability.
Oh my God.
Have a great night.
Call out culture. Jeebus.
Okay, so we have someone joining us on Zoom. We have Tone, just so you know.
Hola.
And where's Claudia?
Oh, Claudia went to the bathroom.
And did Louise leave already? This is her paper.
She's right there.
Louise? Oh, hi, Louise. Louise, this is your paper.
No, you can keep it, I'm cool with it.
All right, cool. Thank you.
I rushed through it so you can keep it. Lucas says he wants to read it afterwards too.
All right, I'll give you that.
Yeah, that was,
Hello. Hey. What do you need?
yeah, that was a Dave blog about, encouraging co-op businesses.
What?
That was a Dave's blog about
Yeah,
encouraging co-op businesses.
Oh, really?
There's a startup accelerator dedicated solely to co-ops in Boston. Apparently, after today's globe. Yeah. And then it continues on this page. Do it. Do it. Good job. Whose meeting is this? Whose meeting is this?
Isn't it all?
Whose house?
Yeah, I'm kidding. Is that for me?
Yes.
Thanks. What? Thank you, Mike. All right.
I'm sorry, Luce. I didn't realize you were sitting here.
No, I'm not, I'm leaving.
Oh.
Goodbye. Bye, Louise.
Yeah,
We'll see you next week.
yep. I'm not talented at, but
Oh, you don't have to be a talented art person. Lots of
You just
art
gotta
people are
think.
not talented.
Woo! Hot take.
It's too organized for this.
All right, Joe.
So where do things stand?
I don't know.
I was thinking that we could wrap up what we talked about and then just do the list today. If that's we could just- yeah.
I realized after last week I had already made
And we did do a mission
so
statement.
late.
Okay.
Do you want to do 2-minute background for Tone? Because Tone's joining us on Zoom is completely new to this meeting.
Yeah, so I think last week, well,
Or last meeting.
yeah, last meeting, yeah, a month ago, which shows where I'm at. We spoke about developing a list of institutions or different arts organizations within the city that we would like to at some point reach out to, or just to have like a list of more underground spaces within Boston. It would have to do with arts and culture. And then we were also talking about maybe having a get together where we have a small meeting, like a brunch or something, with maybe 8 or 12 sort of creatives in the Boston area, and sort of discuss if we were going to have a mixer, or do a little bit of programming that would sort of bring people together. What that would look like. I have like hot pepper stuff in my throat. What that would look like, and sort of like what our wants and needs for people to hold spaces for people like that. Is that
Thank you, Claudia. Sounds good.
Word. I'm pulling up the thing now. Okay. So I don't know. I started a tentative guest list, and then I was thinking, since we had pretty much already decided that it was going to be brunch and a hike through the park, we were thinking that we could go to what's that place? The Arboretum. You know, they have that big hill. It's really nice. So we were thinking that we could do that afterwards if people elected to. And so, yeah, I was thinking that we could talk about that and like who these 8 to 12 people are. There's already 4 of us here. So,
well, I mean, in addition to us.
yeah. Oh, right.
So 8 to 12 in addition to us sitting at the table. Okay. So we're just like throwing stuff out?
Yeah, spitballing.
Who's taking notes?
I'm going to do it.
All right. Oh.
Maggie.
Maggie, and say.
Oh, sorry. Maggie Cavallo is a local curator / educator, and they are they run in a space called Castle Drone, and it's studio spaces, but it's also a gallery called Castle Drone, and they do like mini residencies in Hyde Park.
She's also an arts educator.
Yep.
She works at Leslie, Harvard, and Oxford.
Yep.
And so are there any parameters around who we want to consider for the 8 to 12?
We should talk.
Because my recollection from the last conversation was this brunch is a planning brunch for a larger meeting, right? And so we're saying 8 to 12. So then there's some idea as to why we would have like the smaller group of 8 to 12, and this smaller group is planning something that's going to be worse than right? So then how are we thinking about then who the 8 to 12?
I guess like people that are well networked would be like the first thing, and then people that are good people.
Okay. Good people, well networked, and do we want diverse networks?
Yeah.
So we're making sure we're getting different. So Maggie Cavallo hits those 3?
I think so.
Well, I know I've mentioned, if you can feel it, you can say it. If you can feel it, you can say it. Yeah, that's it. Speak it. That's it.
No, yeah.
The person, I'm forgetting her name for a second.
The poetry?
Yeah, that's
yeah,
poetry.
what's poetry spoken word?
Is that Jackie?
I think so.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah,
So
she's perfect.
she
She's
should
great.
definitely be, and she's an architect, and she's involved in so many things, and she's a fantastic organizer. I mean, and she's very well networked, so all around.
Oh, I don't know. I don't think I have her on Facebook.
I know Jackie.
Okay. Yeah.
So she's the ED of Women's of Color.
Oh, what?
Yeah. I'm thinking Catherine Morris, Bam's Fest.
Yes, Kat. Yeah.
And then I guess Ariel. I can invite Ariel.
Yeah. Ariel, for anybody who doesn't know.
Oh yeah, Ariel Gray is a writer / artist. We do Printing Dead together, but also she works for WBUR. And she's like, so she's like also like, really well connected and like a really good critic. So I think that she would have like a lot of really interesting opinions.
I'm thinking of a person who I'm not sure in regards to how she's networked, but I know she does stuff at Black Art Market or the Black Market. She's an artist herself, and she's progressive and feminist, and I don't know.
Destiny?
No.
I am thinking Destiny, Destiny Cole.
Yeah.
I was thinking Destiny Cole.
Zahira Nur Truth.
What's it?
Zahira.
Just the Black Market person?
Yeah.
Okay.
An artist.
Do you know how to contact them?
Well, I'm Facebook friends.
Chanel. Several.
Oh yeah, several. Yeah.
Yeah, somebody's on Zoom.
And Oh, God, that's Audrey stuff.
Oh, yeah.
There's Audrey, there's someone else, Ariana,
Yeah, I know Ariana. I don't know Audrey.
Oh, no, I'm sorry.
Thinking
I just
Ariana?
couldn't, I
Yeah.
worked with both of them at the
Okay.
MFA, and so I just.
Yeah. Ariana isn't going to be in Boston for
Ariana.
too much longer, but Ariana would definitely be a good person.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I guess we should get some. Is men in here?
Well, there's Cliff Notes.
Yeah.
I don't know Cliff Notes, so.
I don't know.
Do you- anybody know Cliff Notes?
Facebook friends, I
Okay.
haven't been keeping up real tight.
Yeah, what's
I
up?
think Justina. I think Justina has a connection.
Oh, Justina is
should be
awesome.
on
Maybe
phone,
Christina, yeah.
obviously.
Yeah, anybody?
What about, Fifth Loud?
Oh, yeah.
What's that?
And Tom, are you able to hear? So are you kicking around names of the network?
So I'm not really. I'm just going to hop off. Yeah, I'm going to hop off, but I will probably be in person at the next meeting.
Okay, excellent, Tom. So look forward to hearing back from you.
Thank you. It was nice meeting everyone.
Have a wonderful night.
You too. Good night.